colleagues, I want to take this opportunity to invite all of you to Maseno University officially, and please feel welcome. I know we have several collaborators and several participants from different universities, different countries gathered here this morning for this very important workshop on issues of pesticides and environmental health. Now, just to give a few remarks about issues of pesticides from what I know I was given some speech, but I'm not very good at reading speech. So I'm not very good at reading speeches, but let me say that Kenya is predominantly an agricultural country, and agriculture is the backbone of our economy. And when we are talking about pesticides, we are talking about issues that are at the heart of this country, and particularly when we are talking about food safety, environmental health, and even the health of human health that arise from the use of pesticides. Those of us, I will talk from an anthropological point of view. I don't know what maybe scientists will say, but there are quite a number of perceptions that are associated with the use of pesticides. And these are conversations that take place among even the old people, among the people who are learned, educated, highly educated like us, those who never went to school, and things like that. And therefore, this workshop is very timely in terms of triggering debates and discussions, and perhaps further research on issues of how pesticides actually affect our health, affect environmental health, and most importantly, affect agricultural productivity and issues of food safety. And I can tell you that in the villages where some of us come from, I can tell you that in 1973, pan paper mills was launched in Webuye and parts of Western Kenya. And downstream here in River Nzoia, where I come from, I would hear in the normal conversations in the villages when our grandmothers would tell us how before 1973 there was a very delicious species in River Nzoia that they used to feed their visitors, and that it was quite plenty. But that fish went off. Actually, the fish extincted because of the chemicals from pan paper. And therefore, they'll tell you that pan paper actually affected aquatic life. And perhaps that is happening in many other places. And during the time when pan paper died, was closed and things like that, again, there were rumors that the fish has come back. That is in the villages. And these are people who have never gone to school. So for us, particularly anthropologists, we need to look into some of those issues. What perceptions do people have? Just some 2 weeks ago, I was talking to a very senior professor of horticulture, and was telling that if you see a skooma that is quite clean, that does not have any moles, then you know that there has been a lot of chemicals applied in the production of that skooma. And therefore, it means that that skooma is not safe for human consumption. So that is now a professor talking. And so, and in most cases, we are talking about, people are talking about cancer and things like that. Some of these diseases that are emerging because of use of pesticides. So therefore, I want to thank our colleagues, our collaborators from the University of Oslo and other collaborators that I think one of my colleagues is going to talk about, for thinking about coming up with this very timely workshop. But as we do this workshop, and as a university, and I know some of us here are university staff, teaching and doing research, I want us to take this opportunity to enhance our linkages between research, policy, and practice. In most cases, we gather in workshops like this. We come up with very nice conversations. I've been part of it because I've done so many. I've participated in several workshops, several conferences across the world. And in most cases, those workshops do not translate into practice, into policies, and into ideas and programs that can enhance livelihoods. Workshops like this and others that are organized to discuss how certain activities, including pesticides, affect human life, and that the information and data that we obtain from these kind of workshops are used to improve livelihoods, not for just for purposes of conferencing and things like that. And therefore, I expect, even from us in Maseno, we expect that at the end of this workshop, we shall have something like a policy brief coming out of this workshop proceedings, besides the normal publications that we cherish as scholars. One would expect some policy briefs that get into influencing some of the policies that we have in the country, so that the use of pesticides, and as many of us are aware, this country abolished a number of use of pesticides because of human health issues, but we really haven't done a lot of research. We have not done adequate research. We've not collected adequate data to see how those policies about banning use of certain pesticides have been received at the grassroots level. Because most people right now are thinking about crop production, and as you know, because of population pressure, agricultural and soil health has really deteriorated, and people are using some short-term means, including the use of pesticides, to enhance food production, without necessarily knowing the environmental and human health aspects of the use of such pesticides. And therefore, it would be very important that perhaps at the end of this workshop, we come up with resolutions. We come up with the solutions that can enhance research, data collection, research, and improve our knowledge on how use of pesticides not only affect environmental health, but also human health, and what can be done about that. And that can feed into some of the lectures, some of the academic programs that we are currently carrying out in our universities, so that when we graduate anthropologists from our departments in the universities, then we are graduating anthropologists with the current knowledge. And I want to encourage our colleagues who are lecturers that it's always beneficial to combine lecturing with research, and not to continue using the so-called yellow notes that sometimes people use because you don't have time to do research. If you invest in research, you become a very productive lecturer. And therefore, as I conclude my remarks this morning, I want again to thank everyone for creating time to be here. Kisumu Hotel is a very friendly place. If you have any problems, we are here. I'm also going to be here for some part of the day, and tomorrow I'll also be here. I'll be together with you people, but I'm hoping that these deliberations can lead into some practical solutions at the end of 2 days workshop. Thank you very, very much, colleagues, and feel welcome.
On behalf of organizers with University of Oslo and University of Maseno, I would also want to particularly thank the University of Maseno, and Eric Eder, Dr. Kumu, Dr. Langhotel, and Kevin Kamola. Kevin, you didn't actually introduce yourself when you stood here in the beginning, but big thanks to you as well for really making it today, for us being here in Kisumu and at the Kisumu Hotel. And a big thanks to Kisumu Hotel also for welcoming us and making this such a nice event. So Professor Nyambele talked about a little bit about our collaboration between University of Oslo and University of Maseno of the Anthem project, which is a collaboration with not only with University of Maseno, but also University of Nairobi and also KEMRI in Kenya, the Kenyan Medical Research Institute. It's a collaboration also with University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania and NIMRI, the Tanzanian Medical Research Institute there, and with the University of Makerere in Uganda. And we have students and colleagues from these universities here today. Very warm welcome. So this project, the Anthem project, which is building capacity in research in environments and health in East Africa in anthropology. This is its aim really is to build capacity in research and teaching within social science and particularly anthropology on relevant issues to do with environment and health in East Africa today. The focus is very much on building the new generation of researchers and students who will go out there and do fantastic research and also move some of them, we hope, into policy making, into government, into civil society organizations. And so we collectively we see this as a project that builds future scientists and leaders. And as part of this symposium, we have several of the Anthem PhD students here who will talk tomorrow, and some of the master's students as well. And very warm welcome to them. And we're sure that you will gain a lot of inspiration from this interdisciplinary symposium. And that in turn, you know, in your future careers, you'll contribute to building this dialogue between research, policy, advocacy that we are doing today. So now some just brief information about their organizations who have events happen, because it's a result of a huge amount of teamwork between the organizations that are on the program. So we have the Roots to Food initiative and the Heinrich Böll Foundation, who have, of course, been very, very prominent, very important in pushing the whole issue of pesticides in Kenya into the public debate and into policy issues. We have especially Dr. Harun Wari and Christine Gatwari, and also our director here today. Then we have from Greenpeace Africa has also been very much involved in organizing this event, and we'll hear more from them today as well. We have Elizabeth Atieno, Ferdinand Omonti, and Lynn, who we'll all hear more from in the course of the day. We have Ecotrek Consulting, and Zilke Bolmer, who we'll also hear from, has been very prominent in organizing. And then we also have Kenya, especially Jeff Kahuhu and Rosina Mbea. So this has been a huge amount of teamwork between all these organizations who have really developed the program, invited the speakers, got participants here, and developed the we have, and then from the University of Oslo today we have myself and Wenzel Geisler, who will lead the next session. And then, of course, I mentioned already, University of Maseno, we've been part of this organizing committee. So this event has also grown out of another event, which was held last year in November 2024 in Dar es Salaam, which was organized by Dr. Vera Ngori, who's sitting here in the front. So Professor Vera Ngori, she's a toxicologist from the University of Muhimbili, and has previously worked at the Tropical Pesticides Research Institute as director of the toxicology department there. And Professor Ngori has been very, very, very active in here for many years on the issue of pesticides in Tanzania, and has been really an active voice calling for regulation, control of pesticides coming into and being used in Tanzania, and also the whole issue of highly hazardous pesticides.
Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, dear friends, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today here on behalf of the Heinrich Böll Foundation and the Route to Food Initiative. The Route to Food Initiative is a program of the Heinrich Böll Foundation. Before I start my remarks, I would like to thank in particular the Maseno University, and especially the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Dr. Eric Nyambeda. Thank you very much also for your very enlightening opening remarks. I would also like to thank the University of Oslo, represented here by Dr. Ruth, who just spoke, and Dr. Wenzel Geisler. Thank you for the collaboration, and thank you for pulling up this event. And a special thank you to our very close collaborator and good friend, Dr. Silke Bollmoor, who's just sitting, everybody knows her, I guess, is just sitting here in front of me. Thank you also, Silke, and good to see you in Kisumu. Now, before I start, I would especially make a remark, because this is a regional event. We have guests from Uganda, and we have guests from Tanzania. And the last days and the last week, I think, since last Wednesday, has been very, very difficult in Tanzania. So, of course, we were trying to follow what happened. We tried to get in touch with our close friends and colleagues who live and work there, which was not difficult, which was not easy. It was very difficult for the reasons you know. I would like to say, especially to our participants from that country, that we are deeply, I would say, very deeply saddened by the loss of life, and also shocked by what happened. So I particularly like to thank you for being here despite the circumstances. Let me come back to what I wanted to say. So, the Heinrich Böll Foundation, with our Route to Food initiative and our program, we strive to advance the realization of the right to food in Kenya by promoting public awareness, citizen engagement, and policy advocacy affecting food systems. I think Professor Eric Nyambeda mentioned very clearly in your opening statement how important it is to work together between academia and policy practitioners, so that progress is being made when it comes to regulation and outside the academic workplace. So thank you for that. We hold this symposium, at the defining moment for Kenya and East Africa, a moment when the conversation on pesticides has moved from quite concern, I should say, maybe academic concern or concern that was like more privately, but not in the so much in the public domain, as it is now, recently. It moved actually from a quite concern to a visible policy action. Across the region, citizens, scientists, and policymakers are asking, how can we grow food that nourishes people, protects biodiversity, and sustains life. When we launched the Pesticides Atlas, and the key author of the Pesticide Atlas just sitting here in front of me, Dr. Wilke, I also have a copy, the Pesticide Atlas. That was in 22, I believe. We thought to put facts behind this question. The atlas revealed that nearly 44% of pesticides used in Kenya contain active ingredients already banned in the EU. And that 3/4 of products in circulation in Kenya include at least one highly hazardous pesticide or one ingredient that is highly hazardous. And I want to stress the point that these are not abstract numbers. They reflect real harm to farmers, of course also to consumers, and to the ecosystem in general. They tell the story of how soils, water, biodiversity are paying the price for chemical dependence in agriculture. The Heinrich Böll Foundation has continued to publish several studies. I believe we have our studies there, also for you to have a look. And with those studies, we advocate for a shift towards safer, fairer, and more sustainable food systems. We published a scientific report which lists 30 highly hazardous pesticides and their ingredients, on which I'd like to mention here the authorities, both the regulatory authorities, but also the ministry, acted upon when they withdraw ingredients or decertify ingredients or withdraw them from the market or restricted them, as they did by the end of last year and this year. We put out public statements, advocacy brief, urging for faster regulatory reforms and accountability in pesticide sector. Another key publication is about the alternative, because when talking about highly hazardous pesticides, about the chemicals, we also need to speak about alternatives. What are the alternatives? So if ingredients that are highly hazardous are withdrawn from the market, are not available to farmers anymore, so also we have to see if they're really not available. I mean, if they're withdrawn effectively and not only withdrawn by decree. Yeah. Those who use these ingredients, or not ingredients, the products to produce agricultural produce must have alternatives. So based on this fact, we published the agroecology farmer's guide. It's a sort of manual. Can you hear me? I'm sorry. I think I dropped the mic a bit too low. Sorry for that. If I should repeat something or you couldn't hear me, just let me know, please, or maybe ask questions. Yes, the Farmer's Resource Guide, which is also available, of course, on our electronic platforms, but also in print. So our engagement has been steady and clear. Kenya must phase out highly hazardous pesticides while ensuring that farmers are not left behind. I think it's important to make this point and to stress it again, that they are equipped with knowledge, biological alternatives, and market support to farm safely and also profitably. This is a key factor. The economic factor is key. In that regard, we recognize that encouraging policy steps taken by the government, by the Kenyan government. In September 23, the review of the review by the PCPB, the Pest Control Products Board. Then in April 25 this year, very important announcement came out, confirming by a very important announcement by the Ministry of Agriculture, confirming the withdrawal of 8 HHP active ingredients, marking the first tangible move toward reform. And in June 25, there was a directive by the Cabinet Secretary for Agriculture, which confirmed the withdrawal of 77 pesticide products and the restriction, limited use of 202 others to non-food crops and the start of a wider regulatory review. These actions signal progress, and they reflect years of joint effort by scientists, civil society, and farmer advocates who have persisted in calling for accountability and transparency. However, we must also be honest, this is and can only be the beginning. Implementation, enforcement, farmer training, and the creation of real alternatives remain urgent gaps. And this is why this symposium is so important. We're not just here to discuss what has been banned, we're here to explore what can replace it. At the Heinrich Böll Foundation, we believe that agroecology provides the pathway forward. It connects food safety with environmental health, farmers' livelihoods, and social justice. An important point also. Agroecology means building farming systems that are diverse, resilient, and rooted in local knowledge, systems that produce healthy food while restoring ecosystems and strengthening communities. The transformation will not come by regulation alone. We know that. But from collaboration like this symposium here, between farmers, researchers, between policymakers and citizens, including consumer lobby groups, and between local experience and regional frameworks. It will require shared learning, consistent advocacy, and the political will to turn evidence into policy. I think that something you mentioned in your opening speech as well. As we open this symposium now, I invite all of us to reflect on three questions. What kind of food systems do we want for East Africa? How can science, policy, and advocacy reinforce one another? And how can we, as a region, work together across borders, because pesticides trade and impacts do not stop at national borders. Thank you very much.
I think that Joachim has spoken much more eloquent than I could have done in praise of your, you listed and gave us really a lot of important details. So thank you very much for all that remains to me now for the first speaker to say thank you very much to Joachim and thank you to the Böll Foundation to join this event of Maseno University so wholeheartedly and to lead us in the interface between, as Joachim said, scientific investigations, both natural science, biology, agroecology, whatever, and social science on the one hand, and policy change and activism, public civil society debate on the other hand. So thanks a lot for having coming to us and joining us as mere academics and joining us wholeheartedly. So the next speaker, sorry? Oh, there was an echo, sorry. I saw you move and heard an echo. So I was sorry. Thank you. So the next speaker to deepen this kind of perspective is Dr. Harun Baroui. Dr. Harun is a Doctor of Agricultural Sciences. He's a researcher by his academic credentials. He's also a policy advocate and policy maker and a policy driving force, I should say. And he's also a farmer, like many others in the room here. So he will speak to all of us equally. He is the lead agroecology and food rights person at the Böll Foundation, which, as Joachim said, is the foundation of the German Green Party that has offices in different parts of the world, and the Nairobi office is responsible for the 3 East African countries and beyond. So Harun is a key person in this institution, as well as a lead author and contributor to key reports with which the Böll Foundation has driven policy debate in Kenya and beyond in the last 5 years. So please welcome Dr. Harun.
Thank you so much, Professor Wiesel. Thanks, Elke. So, colleagues, It's yet another morning that we would like to dive now to the policy landscape in this country that has been able to govern our issues of pesticides. This is with a view of creating a chronology on how issues have evolved to manage our pesticide issues in this country. Allow me to start by saying that we have got quite a wide variety of pesticides in this country, the products that are being used. Actually, for the ecologists that are here, you'll agree with me that if we are talking about biodiversity, we'll be having pest diversity rich and well into this country. Unfortunately, we realize that about half of our pesticides have been banned in the EU, and yet we continue utilize them in this country. More to say that 3/4 of these pesticides in this country, the products, are highly hazardous. And so, I mean, they have at least one ingredient or the active ingredient that is highly hazardous. Let me clarify that. Remember, when we are talking about a product that we call a pesticide, it has the active ingredient that are caused in terms of addressing it may be the pathogens, may be the insects or the weeds. So that's what we are saying, at least one of the active ingredients, the killer ingredient. And out of this, we do appreciate that these expose our farmers as the consumers and the environment to a greater risk when it comes to utilizing those pesticides. So, why policy reform is key? One is that we appreciate that public health is at risk, that it needs protection. Of course, our ecosystems, both flora and fauna, that is plants and insects, above and below ground, is being threatened by those highly hazardous pesticides. And of course, we need to address for example, the market failures due to high residue effect, which translates to the risk attributed to the economic and expert. And last but not least, it's very important that we need to enhance or uplift the aspects of the right to food. Of course, we are promoting our food sovereignty in terms of what we eat. Allow me to dive into the policy and regulatory framework in this country and start by saying that in 1982, we were able to enact the CAP 346, and which is the main law that govern pesticides import regulations and use. And that's the aspect of the registration and the import in terms and utilization of the pesticides in Kenya. And here we have got the Pest Control Products Board, which is our regulator in this country, anchored within the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Development. And then we have got other supportive institutions that come in to intertwine at the implementation. We have got the National Environment Authority, we have got KEPHIS, and of course the county governments of Kenya. Remember that Kenya, we have got a developed systems of governance, and we have got 47 counties that are mandated to be able to handle agriculture, and under the Constitution, agriculture is a devolved function to the counties. However, we need to appreciate that these mandates are quite fragmented, and this leads to very weak element of coordination among these institutions. And this is one of the major bottling blocks. We have got weak enforcement, like I've said, and this translates into monitoring of the residues that are attributed to these pesticides. And the way PCPP has been working out in terms of registration, the withdrawals and the safety elements is that this has not been transparent. And we have found this as a major challenge. The other one is that this effort actually, and I know AAK CropLife is starting to do a bit of training. You can see, even if you go to LinkedIn, the social media, they are really updating us on this, also in the website of PCPB. We appreciate this and we agree. But still, we strongly feel that the capacity build and the extension effort is still weak and needs to be enhanced through the appropriate institutions. And very important is provision of the alternatives, may it be bio inputs or the less hazardous pesticides. So that is also a major failure. However, I would like to mention that there has been increased momentum in through the civil society, and this is well understood from the 2019. Thank you, Silke and the team, the Root to Food initiative. There was a very big impetus on this, and we are seeing fruits that are being we are yielding in this effort. Allow me very quickly to take you through the milestones that have been realized from 1982 when we had the Pest Control Product Board coming on board to where we are currently. So we are talking of the Pest Control Product Act being enacted in 1982. And from here, there has been gradual building up momentum with other institutions that work around with PCPB. It could be indirectly or not even by design, but that also promotes PCPB, like mentioned earlier. And this, I mentioned, translates the weak enforcement and outdated regulation. Allow me to mention that until the 2021 movement through the Root to Food initiative, withdrawals in this country have been through the international convention, like the Rotterdam Convention. So that is a ban at the international level. But intentional withdrawals, we started seeing that momentum peaking around the 2021 period after our great push, our publications, our advocacy campaign, our capacity building, our awareness creation, and we realized seeing this momentum coming on board. And then coming to this period now, whereby we see in the 2020, we had a parliamentary petition, number 006. And we would like to recognize the effort of our parliamentarians like Honorable Gladys Boss-Chore in this movement. And this was very impactful. Then coming to period of between 2021 and 2022, we continued our publications that were utilized a lot in terms of this petition, in terms of the media. Actually, I'm glad and proud to say, and Silke, you'll bear my witness, that your work and us as the Root to Food initiative has been used broadly by the media. Most of the statistics that you find in the media houses, in our print media, in our newsroom, comes from the kind of research that the Root to Food initiative and other civil societies have created that momentum, and we really need to applaud that effort. Thank you so much for your cooperation on that. Then we saw in the 2020, there was a draft of the Pest Control Bill, but this has not, in fact, last year, the cabinet passed it, but this has not come to the light. We need to know what efforts are there. And then, of course, the momentum of our national initiative you've seen. And very important was the June 2025 by the executive, by our CS, Professor Karega Motai. This was a real milestone by that pronouncement. And just quoting from what Joachim mentioned, we had the 77 products that are withdrawn, the 2002 that were restricted from crop use. And we would like to say that this is a big milestone in terms of the executive pronouncement. It seems now that our work is getting tracked in terms of being accepted. So which are the emerging up and policy challenges that we are facing? One is I mentioned about enforcement and monitoring. The other one is the transitioning support, especially for the alternatives. And please, our farmers, we have got the guide by the Root to Food initiative that is behind there. Please carry the guide in terms of the alternatives that you can go for when you want to transition from conventional agriculture. Of course, the knowledge and the costs associated for the bio inputs are quite sometimes high, and this needs to, and of course, accessibility, they are not quite available. Aspects of transparency, I say that by the PCPB, it's wanting. Alignment of the institutions, I mentioned that we need to align, and we hope the new bill that was approved by the cabinet needs to address that. And of course, we have lack of integration within the policies around the aspects of agriculture, health, and environmental policies. There's that gap that needs to be closed up. And very important, the regional cooperation is a very key issue that needs to be done. During our afternoon, please come, during our panel discussion, we have got very endowed panelists that will be able to handle this, how we are going to integrate our East African policies. We have people like Dr. David Kabanda, who is doing major work with the East African community on agroecology policy, whom we as the Böll Foundation, we are partnering to move this integrated policy approach. We'll be discussing that later in our panel discussion. The way forward is that we need to strengthen enforcement and transparency. I've mentioned about that. Support our farmers in terms of transitioning from conventional to agroecological practices. And Joachim, you mentioned that in your speech. Very important is that agroecology and research need to be strengthened further and supported. We need to have an integrated approach on the 3 policy areas, the 2 segments I talked about that are still quite working in parallel. That is the aspects of the food policies, health, and environment. Very important. In Kenya, we need to work very strongly to empower counties and our communities in terms of the policy landscape that they are working in. I'm so glad that we have been led by Murang'a County, and we see other policies emerging. For example, through the Böll Foundation, we have supported the West Pokot. We are finalizing Makueni. Actually, Makueni will be launching its agroecology policy on Friday this week. That's why I think we are missing Biba, CEO, and I'm glad Kendi is here. She's pushing that launch. We have just finished supporting and working very well with other partners for Nakuru agroecology policy. We're hoping to be launched by end of this month of November. So this is just a testimony that is happening. I can see Alice there from CGA, the regulations for Kajiado County on pesticides and the crop through also the partnership through the Böll Foundation. Thank you so much on this kind of partnership. We really want to appreciate this. Very important, we need to promote regional collaboration. I mentioned the work that through the David Kabanda in Uganda he's working on, and we'll be working very closely with the Böll Foundation on that work. Is a testimony that we need to move on regionally. So thank you so much for that, and that takes me to the end of this presentation.
Thank you so much, Paul. Yeah, thank you. My name is Elizabeth. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. As an activist, one thing I've learned is that showing up is half the fight, because most of the time as a campaigner, you'll campaign for so many years, and then you get discouraged at times because you feel like maybe what you're trying to fight for is not yielding the results that you'll want to see. And now we are seeing years and years after advocacy of farmers, civil society organizations, we can now see at least the government is listening. So just being in this room today to listen, to discuss and see how we can be able to move forward is already a win for the environment and for the food system. So thank you so much for being here. As I've said, my name is Elizabeth Atieno Polo. I work with Greenpeace Africa as a food campaigner. And some days I still can't believe that I'm a food campaigner with Greenpeace Africa, because growing up, I used to look at Greenpeace Africa and the advocacy work they used to do, and I thought, oh my God, these people are so courageous. Now I'm part of that courageous team. So yeah, I'm very proud to be working with this organization. I just want to speak a bit about who we are as an organization, what we stand for, and also why we choose to take on this very uncomfortable question to ask, is it really food or is it poison that we are feeding ourselves and also feeding our environment? And one thing about Africans, and I can say that even for the East African region, is that we are very generous people. I saw a video the other day, and the young people in the room, I think you've also come across that video on Twitter, where there's a guy who was showing how when you visit the village from the town, it's like you have to hide because every single person will want to welcome you for lunch or dinner, or abide something. So we are very generous, but now we are becoming generous in sharing everything, including pesticides. We have pesticides in our food, in our water, in our soil. And this is a situation that we are seeing across the continent and also the region. And I don't think this is the type of generosity we have asked for. So it's very important that we're here to discuss and see how we can be able to get rid of these toxics in our environment. So as Greenpeace Africa, we are part of a global movement working across 55 countries globally. And in Africa, we work in Kenya, Cameroon, DRC, and Senegal. And as an organization, we believe that we believe in something very basic, which is the fact that people deserve clean air, safe food, healthy environment, and also a livable planet. So our food campaign generally addresses the critical challenge of shaping the continent's food future. Right now in the continent, we can say that for sure, we see increasingly how our food systems are dependent on fossil fuel-based agriculture. This is synthetic fertilizers, it's the petrochemical pesticides that we are seeing, it's the intensive machinery and also the highway supply chain, which is also increasing the food insecurity situation in the continent. So this model it's being sold as modernization, but we all know how it's placing economic pressure and structural vulnerability to our farmers, the very key people who are feeding us. So instead of building resilient, we are seeing a food system where we are dependence on imported inputs and also external corporations. But today, when we are here, our focus is on our food or poison campaign. So before anything else, I just want to acknowledge and sincerely thank the institutions, researchers, farmers in the room, Heinrich Böll Foundation and other CSOs that have done amazing, amazing work. Even the journalists who are in the room, they've done amazing work in making sure that they are championing on the issue of HHPs. And now we are seeing some policy moves that are happening. And this was even before some of us stepped into this space in general. So the evidence, the momentum, the policy shifts that we are all seeing is coming across because of the work that these organizations continue to lead, organizations like Heinrich Böll Foundation. So I just wanted to start by that and say thank you so much for that work and for keeping that advocacy spirit. So as Greenpeace Africa, our intention coming into this conversation around pesticides, it's just not to duplicate the efforts that we are seeing on the ground, but rather is to see how can we be able to contribute to strengthen this conversation and also ensure that communities that are most affected are the ones who are leading when we talk about solutions. So as we've seen, we continuously see change coming in and rightly focus on the human health impact. That is some of the issues that we've had being raised here, the cancer clusters, reproductive disorders and all that. But as we continue to do that, we also see a lot of gap on the environmental impacts of these HHPs. We are talking about degradation of soil, contamination of water, that is rivers, groundwater. We are also looking at the collapse of pollinator populations that we have. And also these remain under-researched and under-prioritized in the continent, not only in Kenya or in the region alone, East Africa, but in the continent. So these impacts, we all know that they are silent, but they are long-term. And they do not make headlines immediately. For example, when you talk about how our water is being, groundwater is being contaminated, how we are losing our pollinators, it's not something that immediately catches the headline or people want to talk about or care about immediately. But we know that we cannot be able to produce food in a continent that is dying, in a planet that is dying. So it's something that we really need to start giving attention to. And because of that, when you look at the progress that is happening in Kenya that Dr. Harun has just shared with us, we still see a situation where certain pesticides have been banned for use in food crops, but yet we still them being permitted for use in greenhouses, in termite control, and all that. And this is because we continuously don't have enough research to tell us or to monitor how this is affecting our environment. So it's an area that has a lot of gap, but as Greenpeace Africa, we continuously try to want to come into the conversation and see how do we contribute to this. we are talking about bioaccumulation, the toxic substances building up in living organisms, building up even the ones that we are eating currently. Talking about leaching, where we are looking at chemicals infiltrating our soil layers and groundwater system. Environmental contamination in terms of these pesticides being transported by wind, dust, and even water. And also looking at trophic transfer, where these chemicals move up the food chain. So our focus as Greenpeace Africa is looking at these environmental impacts. And as a result of that, we started work with Silke, who we've been doing. She has already done a lot of amazing work around the issue of HHPs. She's worked with Heinrich Böll Foundation on this, and now we are working together to look at this issue from the environmental side of things. So I'm not going to go deep into what the research is, because she's going to be able to speak after me and go deep into all these issues. But I just wanted to bring out this conversation about the gap that we are seeing when it comes to the environmental impact of these HHPs. So we continuously say that food is life. Then if food is life, it means that it's our collective responsibility as everyone who is in the room, and also the people who are not here, to ensure that the way we grow our food does not threaten the very life systems that are supposed to sustain. And that is our environment. So that's why we are here as Greenpeace Africa. So I'm genuinely happy to see you all here today. It's the researchers, the farmers, the students, policymakers, advocates. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really looking forward to a fruitful symposium that is backed with evidence and collaboration, because most of the time when you talk about this issue, people will question you and say that it's propaganda and all that. So being in a room with all the expertise to just discuss and look on way forward, I think that's a big win for everyone who is in the room, and I'm really glad about that. And yes, I know that I say that as Africans we are very generous, but I'm also certain that this is not what our grandparents meant when they say that we should share freely. They didn't mean that we are supposed to be sharing pesticides in our water. They meant that we are supposed to share our seeds, our knowledge, our abundance. And I'm so glad to be in the room so that we can be able to move that forward. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so as Elizabeth said already, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview on the current research we're doing with Greenpeace right now, and that's on the environmental impacts of HHPs on the whole continent. I just want to give you an overview. It's still research, ongoing research, and we also invited the researchers who are doing awesome work on water, on soil, on pollinators, and that will be the next session. So they will give you much more input on that. So starting with a narrative, and I always hear that narrative from the pesticide industry, that we need HHPs for food security. Basically to justify that HHPs are still in use worldwide, but also in Africa, and especially in Africa, we hear this narrative most of the time. And we actually want to challenge this narrative. We want to say, no, farmers don't need HHPs to produce food and to secure food security. They need healthy soil, they need healthy pollinators, rich biodiversity, and also clean waters. And I think that's quite important, and it's quite challenging to challenge this narrative by the industry, because it is present all over the world. So maybe just jump right into why is actually the environment so important to us. You can see on the slide the importance of the pollinators, and 78 of the leading food crops worldwide are dependent on animal pollination. That adds up to 35% of the world crops production, and 75% of the crop species worldwide get higher yields if they are pollinated. There are studies in Kenya, we found, for example, in Kakamega forest, where they looked at the effect of pollinators, and they found that 25% yield increase is happening if bees are present. So they did a comparison between non-pollinators, or like less pollinators, and rich pollinator diversity. And with a squash, or like pumpkin, it's even 99%. So it's really highly dependent, and many African crops are actually dependent on pollinators, dependent on yield. And we always talk about yield decrease in Africa. So pollinators can really have a big impact here. And not only the harvest itself, the yield is important, but also the nutrition of the food. And that's also quite an important study we found, which is looking at the nutrition values of legumes, of cowpeas and other beans. And they found that due to pollinator presence, the protein and the nitrogen content is much higher. So it's also not important for food security, but also for food quality. Beneficial insects, they're also very important. And there is a meta-study in sub-Saharan Africa looking at 99 different studies across 35 different crops. And they found that due to the abundance of beneficial insects, we find 63% decrease of pest abundance on these 23 crops, 50% less crop damage, and 60% crop yield increase. But we all know the soil is also very important. And we used to talk about soil fertility only. But soil fertility only is not enough. We need to talk about soil health. And soil health includes soil life. And soil life is not only the earthworm, which many of us might know, but also bacteria, even fungi. They're all very important for a good yield and good food quality, because they make sure that the nutrients are cycling in the soil, that the nutrients are available to the crops, because sometimes nutrients are just sitting in the soil without being available. And this soil life makes it possible for the plants to take it up. So HHPs, we probably all know, have an impact on all this, on soil life, on pollinators, and also, I didn't include here right now the water, but also on animals and biodiversity in the water. And we know that pesticides are moving. So if a farmer is applying it on the field, the pesticides can drift. They can drift in the water body next to the field. And there are lots of little streams very close to agricultural fields. And if there's wind, we can assume that the drift is much higher. But the pesticides can also enter the river systems via runoff. And if farmers just spray before rain, the runoff is very much contaminated with pesticides. It can also leach into the groundwater. It can evaporate from the plants and from the soil, and it can accumulate in the soil as well. So it's all over. So now what we did with the Greenpeace, we wanted to look at case studies. We wanted to look, we know already a lot about the pesticide use in Kenya, and we also know a little bit about the pesticide use in South Africa. But so with this study, we actually wanted to look at 3 different regions: Kenya for Eastern Africa, Ghana for Western Africa, and South Africa for Southern Africa. And we looked at the currently registered pesticides, so 2025. So for Kenya, we're assuming already the banned pesticides. So chlorpyrifos, for example, is not in there anymore. And you can see at the top diagram, this is the percentage of HHPs of all the registered pesticides. You can see a similar picture. So Kenya, Ghana, and South Africa sharing the same result. Almost 50% are highly hazardous pesticides. If we look at, and that's the bottom diagram, if we look at the percentage of pesticides being banned, again, it's a very similar picture, but Ghana is leading here with a high percentage of pesticides being banned. But remember, these are registered pesticides as of 2025. So the number in Kenya went a little bit down. We heard other numbers from Harun and from Joachim right now. Now, again, these are registered pesticides, but we did the work with the Heinrich Böll Foundation, looking at the actual volume, so the actual use pesticides in the country. And that gives you a different picture. So there might be, at the Toxic Business Report, yes. So there might be only a few pesticides banned or HHPs, but the actual being used much heavier than others. So that's what you can see on the right diagram, the pie diagram, saying or giving you the result that almost 75% of the pesticides are HHPs. And this is the number we heard from Joachim and Harun. We also looked at the toxicity of the registered pesticides in the 3 countries. And we can see more or less in, like, there is not a big difference between Kenya and Ghana. There is quite a big difference in South Africa. But that's the reason for that is, and it's getting a bit complicated, but we don't have the information in South Africa on all registered pesticides. This is under CropLife, so you need to be a CropLife member to actually look at how many pesticides are registered. But it's by far, far more than in Kenya, and these toxicities are based on the information we have on HHP, because a very good group called Unpoison, they came up with an HHP list the beginning of this year. And obviously the toxicity within the HHPs is much higher than if you look at all the registered pesticides. But nevertheless, we looked at bees, at fish, and at earthworms as a synonym for soil life. And we found in all countries that quite a high percentage are toxic to all these different lives in the environment. So what does this mean now? And the aim of the report or the study was to look at available studies across Africa for these 3 countries, looking at are there actually pesticide contamination in water, soil, and pollinator products, and do they have any effect? So we have a lot of information in Europe, for example. In Europe, lots of pesticides are used, also still HHPs, we shouldn't forget that. And there are monitoring programs. In monitoring programs for water, monitoring programs for soil. We don't have that here in Africa. And for Europe, we found that among, I think it was 350 samples, only 17% of topsoil samples across agricultural fields have no pesticides. So it's also a big, we see it's a big problem in Europe, but we don't know if it is a problem in Africa because we don't have any monitoring going on. But there is one really amazing study, and Vera Silva from University Wageningen will talk about it after the tea break. I just want to give a glimpse on that. It's a pesticide analysis study within the Soils for Africa project, and that's an African Union project looking at soil fertility. But they wanted to actually look at pesticides and if pesticides are present in various countries in Africa. And what they found is exactly the same as we know from Europe. Remember, only 17% have no pesticides. In the various countries, 21%, only 21% showed no pesticide residues. And most of them multiple pesticides. So we're talking about pesticide cocktails in soils. And the active ingredients they found mostly across Africa were all HHPs, chlorpyrifos, bifenthrin, imidacloprid, glyphosate, atrazine. We know all these active ingredients. Most of them, apart from glyphosate, are banned already in the EU. And I find it quite interesting, across all the literature review we did, is that most of them were all HHPs. So we're really sitting here with a problem. HHPs are present in the soil, but they are also present in the water. The same on this slide, on the left-hand side, is the information we know from Europe. And we see here amongst the samples, the water samples taken in light green, only less than 6% have less than 10 pesticides. Most of them have cocktails of pesticides, up to 40 different pesticides in one sample. So what do we know in Africa? we found a lot of studies for Kenya, and Faith will also present that after the tea break. She is one of the main authors of most of the publications for Kenya. But again, they found pesticides around Kisumu, they found pesticides around Naivasha, Narok, and always the same pesticides. That's what I found very interesting. It's always the ones I mentioned already for the soil, and chlorpyrifos is always part of it. So it's really good that Kenya is now banning this insecticide, because it's already all over the country. And indirectly, what we found, pesticides also have an indirect effect on human health. For example, an indirect effect on the efficiency of malaria spraying, because many mosquitoes are already resistant. That's a very new study from 2025, from this year, looking at mosquito larvae in rivers being exposed to various pesticides, developing resistance to pesticide spraying when they emerge out of the water and being adult mosquitoes. The same, what have been found is that pesticide contamination in rivers is also increasing the abundance of bilharzia. That has been found for Kenya, because the bilharzia is sort of transported or distributed by a specific snail, and this snail is very persistent against pesticides. So even if there are high levels of pesticides, the snail can survive, whereas all the others, which may compete in the ecosystem with the snail, are dying. So the snail is dominating the system and can transfer the bilharzia. Yeah, and with pollinators, exactly the same. We found many different, not we, but the scientists found many various neonicotinoids in pollinator products like pollen and nectar around Murang'a, Kiambu, and Nairobi. And we don't know the status of the insect biodiversity in various countries in Africa. We don't know it. We know for Europe, again, we know there is a 75% decline of insect abundance, which is a lot. We don't know the status for Africa. So these are all research gaps where we, as scientists, could jump in. Right. Because of time, just want to briefly summarize. So HHPs are used across the continent, and we're assuming, now we only looked at the three countries, Ghana, South Africa, and Kenya, but we're assuming it's not going to be very different in other countries. We know already, for example, the HHP use in Nigeria, it's also the same numbers, kind of 50% of them are HHPs, almost half of them are banned, so the picture is similar across Africa. And the very limited amount of studies shows that HHPs are present in the environmental media, in soil, in water, and in pollinator products, but we don't know the effect. And that's a very, very big gap. We don't know the effect on the biodiversity yet. The pesticides, which have been found across Africa in the various media, I summarized them here. I don't want to read all of them, but for those of you who work with pesticides, they probably all ring a bell. And they're all banned in Europe already. So, and what I also found very interesting is that the most information, all the information I've found comes from science and comes from research in Africa. And I think that's amazing, and thanks to all the scientists and researchers, but there is no information coming from government. So I think we need to change this, that there is actually monitoring taking place. What I also wanted to show you, these are just recent data from Public Eye and Unearthed Greenpeace on the export data of pesticides from Europe to Africa. So you can see a map with as darker as the spots are, as more pesticides being exported from Europe. So Morocco and South Africa are heading. So you see it's an ongoing process, and it's These data are from 2024, and the study found out that the export from Europe basically doubled. And Germany is leading, by the way. I'm from Germany, so I'm very sad about that. But it's a very sad outcome that it's actually not declining, but it is increasing. So we need to sort of join hands and end this double standard and for the phase out and not even maybe the ban of these highly toxic pesticides. Another recommendation I want to give is we really need to understand the problem and we need to map the problem. And I just wanted to show you a little diagram we did for the pesticide atlas with the Heinrich Böll Foundation, where you can see here the different colors on the map. And it shows you very nicely, these are pesticides being used for specific crops and being very bee toxic. So for entomologists, they could use this map and they could say, okay, so we're going to start our study on impact on pollinators in the dark pink areas because we know that lots of bee toxic pesticides are being used. And that's, I think, how you can also use information we get out of these reports being used by scientists to set up their monitoring studies. But not only scientists, I think it's also up to government to do this. You can do the same for water so that you don't monitor the whole Kenya, but you only do hotspots, for example. Oh yeah, and a very important thing is also that the pesticides being on the market, they have been through a certain risk assessment for registration. So that means they have been tested in terms of their toxicity towards pollinators, but towards a European bee. And that European bee might be very different in sensitivity to a wild bee or a stingless bee in Kenya. And there's a very new study from Paul van den Brink, who really looked at the impact of imidacloprid, which is one of the neonicotinoids, on specific organisms in the river system. And they found that tropical species are by far more sensitive than species in Europe, for example. So that really calls for a local risk assessment if needed, not for all of them, but if we know there is toxicity, we really need to push for a more local assessment. And this is my last slide. What we also found in the work I was doing, that the pesticide registration is very often very fragmented across different ministries, across different sectors, and we need to sort of join them. And I think sort of one health approach, it would be possible to sort of get everyone together on one table. And also in terms of the environment, it's very important to align the national policies with the international ones on biodiversity, on climate, etc., and ensure of regulations. We heard already that chlorpyrifos, all right, it's banned, but it's still used for termite control in the country, so it's still available. Imidacloprid is phased out, but it's still allowed to be used indoor in greenhouses, so it's still available. So the enforcement is very difficult if it's still available on the market. Okay, so, now, but we heard already about alternatives. So obviously finding alternatives is also very important. And with that, I would like to release you to the tea break.